Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deserts and Garden Podcast. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Mia. If you're new here on this podcast, we share our daily highs and lows. This is not by any means a highlight reel, but where we share the realities of navigating marriage, faith, and our life together with God's guidance every step of the way. And today's episode is all about choosing obedience over our feelings.
We know, and we get it. It is not always easy to choose doing the right thing, especially when your emotions are like super high or they want to take you in a different direction.
Right. So as we do, we'll break it down into three different sections. First, we'll talk about the importance of obedience and why it's crucial to make the right choices even when it's hard. Second, we'll talk about the struggle of obedience and how to fight through the feelings that pull you away from making the right decisions. And then lastly, we'll talk about trusting God through it all. So how to align our actions with God's will, even when our emotions are saying something else.
And by the way, we'll share some personal stories of how we dealt with this in our marriage because if we're honest, we've been there.
Right, so let's start with why obedience matters. The Bible says in James 1:22, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says."
Yeah, absolutely. Like, that is so important. Obedience isn't about just hearing what God says, it's about actually doing it and moving in it, even when you don't feel like it.
Right.
This applies to big decisions and it applies to the little ones. Like, whether we're, like, when we were first married and we had some really, really tough moments.
Yeah, I mean, there were times where, if we would have given into our feelings of frustration or anger or just feeling done, we probably wouldn't even be sitting here today. But it's obedience that kept us going and that saw us through the tough times in our relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the keys here is obedience isn't about being a, quote unquote, good Christian or just following rules. It's about trusting God's way. It's about trusting God's way is better than our own.
Right. I mean, in Proverbs, it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." So when we obey, even when it's tough, even when our ways seem to make more sense to us, we're trusting that God knows what's best for us.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you said it right there. Like, when we talk about what's best for us.
Right.
Like, it says right in the verse, our paths, our patterns, the way like our minds think,
Yeah.
But to be honest and being real, obedience is hard. We've definitely had our moments, right?
Right.
Like, there were times when I was definitely frustrated and I just wanted to check out. Whether that was emotionally or physically, but that's when I had to choose to be obedient.
Yeah, and that's not just marriage stuff. That shows up in parenting too, or friendships. Like, we have to be obedient in how we lead and how we show up as friends for each other. We have to be obedient in how we discipline and disciple our kids. And that includes when we're tired, when we're feeling empty, like when we're low, and it's easy to let things slide because, maybe we're not all there or all put together. And that's why it's so important for us to every day be filling up and being in the Word, in prayer, in devotion, in community, in groups, so that we don't get to that point where we feel like it's easier to just let things slide because we're running on E.
Right, and we're not saying we always get it right, but the key is that we keep choosing obedience.
Right.
Sometimes it's moment by moment, especially like she said, like when we're exhausted or frustrated.
Yeah. I mean, that's, Pastor Jesse was talking about, that's the difference between David and Saul, where with David, he still messed up, he was not perfect, but he always went back to God, whereas when Saul messed up, it was like he tried fixing it in his own way, he completely turned from God, didn't turn back, and I feel like we've been doing this Timothy 48 challenge, and like for us, even the other night, it was like maybe 10 o'clock, and we hadn't done our 15 minutes of reading for the day, and I wanted to go to bed, but we stayed up, we did it anyway, and I'm glad that we did because the momentum that we had kept us going. It was like looking at my Habits app and seeing, oh, hey, like, you've been doing this for 30 days, like, keep going, keep doing, even though it's 10 o'clock at night, and, like, nobody wants to be reading a book, but...
Yeah. No, like, I mean, I think you got to the point just a couple seconds ago, and that was about like the difference between Saul and David.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing with I was gonna say was with Saul was like you were 100% right. Like he tried to fix everything himself. He didn't trust in God, didn't rely on God, and God was not his source.
Right.
So constantly he was messing up, constantly trying to figure stuff out himself, and at the end of the day, like he failed. Mm-hmm. But David, on the other hand, like David trusted God and always returned to God, and even though he messed up, like we're saying, and like you just said, at the end of the day, God was his source.
Right.
So he'd come back and he'd be repentant, and God would make his path straight.
Right. Like, we don't have to be perfect because our source is perfect. But here's the thing. Obedience isn't just about following rules or checking boxes or keeping your streak going. It's mostly about trusting that God's plan is better than our feelings.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, that's where the peace comes in. When we're obedient, even when it's hard, we trust God's got us, you know. Psalms 119 says, you know, your word's my lamp to my feet and a light unto my path.
I love that verse. I mean, I just feel like that's the perfect picture of obedience. It just reminds us that when we are obedient, it's not 100% about doing the right thing. It's about trusting that every step we take, God is going to guide us and lead us, even when we don't see the whole picture. And Pastor Jesse talked about this before. When you read that verse, your word is like a lamp to my feet. You kind of have to like picture that, like a lamp is not that bright. So if you have a lamp and every single step, you can only see maybe a couple of feet in front of you. And that's where trusting God comes in, because it's like, hey, I'll put this lamp here so you could see this is the next step that you need to take, but you can't see what the next step is.
Right.
And I really loved that analogy with that verse. I feel like every time I hear the verse or read that verse, it like I so visually see one step with a little bubble, next step with a little bubble.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we even take a step back and just be like, all right, God, you lead.
Yeah.
Like, I've had to remind myself several times, like, my feelings don't always reflect the truth. And, like, I choose to be obedient in those. Like, and when I do choose that obedience, I align myself with God's truth and not my emotional truth.
Yeah, so next time that you feel like you're faced with a decision, whether that's in marriage or parenting or just in general, like, remember that choosing obedience over your feelings might not always be easy, it might not always make sense, but it will always be worth it.
Yeah, 100% it's worth it. Like, getting aligned with God will do wonders for yourself, wonders for your mental health, wonders for your marriage.
Yeah, so today we touched on some pretty important points. Obedience is about choosing God's way over our feelings, especially in marriage or parenting. We learned that even when it's tough to make the right choices, trusting God's guidance is what really builds our relationships with Him and with each other, with other people.
Absolutely, and that's the key here. Like, obedience doesn't always come with a feeling of motivation. But that doesn't mean it's not the right choice.
Right.
You know, momentum comes from choosing it over and over again, even when you don't feel like it.
Right. So next time that you are facing that tough decision, just remember that obedience over feelings doesn't just change your actions, it changes your heart and your path.
Yeah, so thanks for listening to the Deserts and Garden podcast. Until next time, walk in love.
Live with purpose
And trust God in every desert and garden.
See ya.